So I want to talk through the evolution of the international system, and we'll do this in a couple different parts, and we're going to be running pretty quickly. I mean, you could spend an entire semester just talking about each of these different parts of the international system and its evolution, but we'll focus a little bit on the transformation of the state system and how that system operates. And so I want to begin with sort of that moment at the end of the medieval era where we kind of cross into the early modern state system and kind of get a sense of what that transition looked like. So this is a map that I pulled from an anthropology textbook, and I really like this as a way of sort of thinking about where the international system was around 1500. It was a system that was very much regionalized, that global transportation was very much limited, that transportation by land was slow, and while there were trade networks, many of the regions were kind of functioning on their own for most of what we might consider international politics. There was also variation in terms of how people were organized. We saw in some places the creation of states where we could think about sort of hierarchical, focused, professional, bureaucratic kind of people who were administering different levels of authority, able to tax and collect resources and mobilize resources. Those kind of systems emerged in China and South Asia, the Middle East, the European states, and different pockets of Africa and the Western Hemisphere. But a good chunk of the planet was also governed by either bands, that would be the green section, so a good chunk of North America, a good chunk of Northern Asia, and then Australia and parts of Southeast Asia, where people are living in small groups, 12 to 100 people. They're self-governing. There's not really specialized authority structures. Governance is very much personal, and it's very much localized, right? These are relationships rather than authority structures. We also have chiefdoms, which exist in a good chunk of South and Central America and sort of the eastern part of the United States today, as well as parts of Southeast Asia and Central Africa, where you have maybe different villages. And each village is sort of self-governing and autonomous, almost like a band, but there's associations among those villages, and there's maybe a level of hierarchy. So then in times of crisis, different villages take on leadership positions in terms of mobilizing and organizing public works projects or warfare, right? So there's a level of organization, but it's not to the level of multiple layers of administrative authority that we see with states. And so it's worth recognizing that, even 500 years ago, the international system looked different, not just in terms of being sort of isolated, but also in terms of just really foundationally how people were organizing themselves on the ground in their daily lives. We can drill down a little bit further and think about what that system looks like in medieval Europe. And so this is a map of Christendom, I guess, or maybe thinking about it a different way, the Habsburgs at the height of their power. The Habsburgs were for many years the family that controlled the Holy Roman Empire, which was this institution that was sort of the political wing of Catholicism or of Christendom in Europe, and was sort of the defender of that order. But I think looking at the distribution of the Habsburg Empire is a useful way to sort of visualize some of the territorial messiness that went on. So in theory, sort of a good chunk of Europe was under the spiritual authority of the Roman Catholic Church based in Rome. The Roman Catholic Church was a large landholder during this period. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church held about 25% of all land in sort of Western Europe, Christendom. So that's spread out across all of this, including the green sections. A good chunk of that is controlled by the Catholic Church. If you look at the Habsburgs and their holdings, it's not a territorial state the way that we see a territorial state today. Instead, it's this collection of chunks of land that have been accumulated through marriage, that have been accumulated through warfare, that have been accumulated through trading. And what they hold in common isn't that they're a country. What they hold in common is that they are the land holdings of a family, which is a different way of organizing political order than we see currently today. That system comes under stress with the Reformation. And with the Reformation, you get the authority of the Roman Catholic Church being sort of confronted both by theological reformers like Martin Luther, who are arguing that the Catholic Church has become corrupt in a variety of ways and needs reform and needs to reimagine sort of its theological foundations. That theological debate ends up turning into a political fight because there are powerful kings and princes and political leaders who chafe at the Christendom system with the Habsburg sort of as a central position. And so you end up getting a conflict, a 30-year-long conflict. It actually goes much longer if you factor in the separatist struggle in the Netherlands. You can get it up to 70 or 80 years. But it's a massive European-wide conflict between the pro-Protestant princes in Germany and the Catholic but anti-Habsburg French against Habsburg dominance. And that war for control over Europe ends up producing, after decimating the European continent and just brutal warfare, ends up producing this treaty called the Treaty of Westphalia. And this ends up being a symbolically and maybe legally important moment in the evolution of the international system. And just for convenience sake, we oftentimes mark 1648, the signing of the Treaty of Westphalia, as the end of the medieval system and the start of the early modern era. Because what the Treaty of Westphalia does is it formally establishes the sovereignty of states. It says states are independent from outside meddling and control, which in this context means the Catholic Church doesn't get to tell you what to do. The Catholic Church doesn't get to determine what your population will, how your population will worship. If you want your population to be Catholic, they shall be Catholic. If you want your population to be Protestant, they shall be Protestant. And it's not anything that the Habsburgs have a say over, and it's not anything that the Catholic Church has a say over. So states are given the authority or recognized in their authority to govern their people as they choose, to extract resources, to conduct war, and they don't have to listen to the Roman Catholic Church in terms of how that is done, right? And so in practice what this does is it formalizes the idea of an anarchic political system. There is nobody in a position of authority that you can turn to when you run into problems, that nobody is in a position of authority to help you resolve your disputes. You are on your own in figuring out how to navigate that system. And that's a huge shift that happens in Europe with the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia that ends up becoming sort of the, I want to say the standard, but the practice throughout much of the international system going forward.